Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi is due to arrive in Geneva to meet his counterparts from the UK, France and Germany, known as the E3. The meetings to discuss the conflict between Iran and Israel as it moves into its second week. It's the first major diplomatic effort on the issue since hostilities began with Israel's first attacks. Well, ahead of the talks, the Iranian Foreign Minister told Iranian state TV that Tehran has refused US diplomatic approaches since the missile strikes began.
At
the present time, while the Zionist entity's aggression against us continues, we don't wish to engage in dialogue with any party. The United States wants dialogue and has sent several serious messages in this regard, and we've frankly emphasised to them that it's impossible to talk about negotiations while the aggression and assault against our country continues. We're engaged in legitimate defence of our country, and this defence won't stop. There's no dialogue with Washington, which is considered a partner in these crimes. Some countries have contacted us, made proposals and sought mediation, but we've had no contact or communication with Washington, and we'll not engage with them under the current circumstances. Washington asked us to negotiate. We refused.
Well, the talks in Geneva come after US President Donald Trump said he'll decide whether the US will get involved in the Israel-Iran conflict in the next 2 weeks. The White House press secretary said Trump remains hopeful about talks with Iran. The president said he may or may not join Israel strikes on Iran and has repeated his call for Tehran's, quote, unconditional surrender. Well, Tahir Asadi is in Tehran for us. Noor Odeh is in Amman. She's there because the Israeli government's banned Al Jazeera from operating in Israel and the occupied territories. Milena Veselinovic is standing by for us in Geneva, where those talks are due to get underway. Milena, obviously a lot of press interest in what is going to be happening in Geneva. If Iran isn't willing to hold talks, what are the Europeans hoping to achieve?
Well, they are hoping to achieve, Rob, some sort of a diplomatic headway. I think they consider the fact that Abbas Araghchi is willing to come here to Geneva a very positive step, even though, as we just heard, he did say that Iran can't or won't negotiate while they're still under fire from Israel. However, there is hope by these European nations and their foreign ministers of UK, France and Germany that they could potentially do something today that could stop the escalation of this conflict from widening into the region and make the situation even worse than it is today. Of course, there are major caveats. One thing that's quite important is that the Americans are not at the table here today on Friday in Geneva. However, the UK Foreign Minister David Lammy, who will be at the talks today, did meet with Marco Rubio, his US counterpart, the US Secretary of State, on Thursday in Washington. He also met with Steve Witkoff, Donald Trump's Middle East envoy. So it is thought that he will be bringing the messages and the views from Washington to the talks here today. Now, we do know that the US and Iran have held multiple rounds of nuclear talks in the last few months. They did not make a lot of headway. There was an impasse over how much Iran could be allowed to enrich uranium. The US side was saying, well, they can't enrich any uranium whatsoever on their own soil. The Iranians were saying that was not acceptable to them. The Americans also wanted to include Iran's ballistic program as part of these talks, and the Iranian side saying, well, that's a completely separate thing. We should not be talking about that. So there were quite significant differences. Now, it is not thought that either of the sides had changed their position significantly. So it is quite doubtful. It does hang in the balance how much progress can actually be made here today on Friday in Geneva.
It's going to be interesting, though, because, I mean, if I remember correctly, France, Germany and the UK were the European signatories to the original 2015 nuclear deal. They also objected, of course, when Donald Trump pulled out of that deal a few years later. How much leverage do you think that gives them with Iran when it comes to talks like this?
Yeah, they were part of those original signatures of the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, a deal that US President Donald Trump pulled out of in 2018. During his first term as president, those countries did try to keep the deal going without the US, but it simply wasn't possible to do that because their financial mechanisms just couldn't engage with the Iranian economy while still respecting the US sanctions. I think just the fact that Abbas Araghchi, the Iranian foreign minister, is willing to meet the foreign ministers of these European countries is significant. There is scope for diplomacy here. There's been that 2-week breather that's been signaled by US President Donald Trump. In terms of leverage, really, what the Europeans can do is act as a bridge between Washington and Iran. And that is why the UK Foreign Minister David Lammy visited Washington on Thursday. And really, the only thing they can do is exert pressure diplomatically on both sides to try to reach some sort of a diplomatic deal.
Milena, thank you very much indeed for breaking that down for us. Milena Veselinovic there in Geneva. Well, the diplomatic talks come as Iran carries out new strikes on southern Israel. Sirens have been sounding in Beersheba and nearby towns. Iran says the attack on a city targeted a technology park housing military and cyber institutions. The Israeli army says an interceptor missile was launched in response. Israeli air attacks have also been carried out across Iran overnight. Missiles hit the outskirts of the northern city of Rasht and explosions lit up the skies over Tehran. We're going to go to Tahir Asadi in the Iranian capital, Tehran. The attacks obviously continuing at the same time as there are efforts at least to try to find some grounds for discussions in Geneva. Just remind us what Iran's position is going into these talks.
Well, actually, we have to take into consideration that this very recent development taking place, diplomatically speaking, takes place under a context in which Iran continues to see these strikes by the Israeli side. And just a couple of hours ago, we've got this report about explosion taking place in central parts of Tehran. And we've got now unconfirmed reports about the assassination of another nuclear scientist. From the very day one of these strikes, Iran has been witnessing the continuation of these strikes, and military officials, top nuclear scientists, and also very ordinary citizens are getting killed, including women and children. The public mood here is extremely, when we speak to people, they are extremely angry about that. But speaking of the very recent important developments taking place on the ground in Geneva, they're facing with a couple of points. First, Iran is trying to send out this message that there is a possibility as far as Tehran is concerned for diplomatic way to settle down the issue, but still there is this optimistic cautiousness that we can see, speaking of the statements that we hear from Iranian officials, including Abbas Araghchi, the foreign minister, who came out ahead of this visit to give an interview to the state TV saying that we are not there for negotiations. We are there as we have been invited by the Europeans, and we are going to listen. So at this point, talks do not seem, at least from Iranian perspective, that much meaningful. If you look at the statements coming from Iranian president, Iranian supreme leader, and other officials, you can see the echo of the same statement that we just heard from the Iranian foreign minister Abbas Araghchi. They are all saying that as long as Israeli strikes continue, and the reality on the ground is that they continue on now an hourly basis, we're not going there, we're not going to talk, we're not going to get engaged in negotiations, but still, they're trying to send out the message that possibility is still out there. We heard the same thing on an X account by the Iranian president Masoud Pezeshkian, who came out to say that as long as the Israelis continue their strikes, their aggressions, we're going to strike back, and retaliation is going to be more and more crushing. And speaking of the latest developments, from day one, we are seeing Iranian retaliatory courses of action taken by military forces of the country, and each day we see sort of next step taken by the militaries using more advanced weaponry, more advanced missiles to strike back the Israelis targeting Iranian different territories. And now we have to keep in mind that it's getting to an unprecedented, dangerous level, with a possibility of U.S. intervention into this already intricate, complicated scenario. And the Iranians on that are very clear. They're saying that if that happens, that runs the risk of a further escalation and a regional war, which is going to take place if that happens.
Tahir Asadi talking to us there from Tehran. Tahir, thank you very much indeed. Well, Norode is joining us now from Amman. Just bring us up to date about that Iranian missile strike in Beersheba, first of all.
It was a very unique missile strike, Rob. One lone missile, the Israeli air defenses did not intercept it. It made impact near a technological park in Beersheba, a major city in the south. We don't know exactly what that building housed, but we do know from the website of the technology park that was impacted that it is adjacent to a campus of the Ben Gurion University and a campus of the Israeli Army's C4I unit, which is the corps responsible for cybersecurity and telecommunications in the Israeli Army and Navy and so on. So there were sensitive sites in that location. Of course, this is heavily monitored and censored by the Israeli Army, but heavy damage was sustained, including to the building housing Microsoft offices.
Talk to us about how Israel is framing its military campaign against Iran to the Israeli people, given the fact that we now know that Donald Trump has said that he is going to delay making a decision about whether or not to get involved for anything up to a couple of weeks.
Well, two things are happening at the same time. On the one hand, you have a narrative to the Israeli public that talks about the free reign that the Israeli Air Force has over the skies of Tehran. You have statements talking about 40, 50, 60 Israeli fighter jets carrying out airstrikes across Tehran and other Iranian cities. So they talk about, Israel's ability to do the job, to do what it takes. You have statements from politicians who say that even if the United States doesn't get involved directly, doesn't strike alongside Israel, targets in Iran, specifically those that Israel cannot target, that Israel would push ahead, although the Israeli Prime Minister has been reluctant to put a timeline on that. And that's important because the longer this takes, the more that this looks like a war of attrition, the more precarious the situation will be for this Israeli government. And in the meantime, you have Israeli politicians, including those in the opposition, including someone like Yoav Gallant, the former Minister of Defense, who certainly does not have favorable opinions of Benjamin Netanyahu, urging Donald Trump to take a decision to actually join the fight. You have billboards in Tel Aviv with Donald Trump's picture saying, "Mr. President, finish the job." And in the meantime, of course, a lot of appreciation for 14 more shipments of weapons and munitions that just arrived overnight from the United States, providing Israel with more assistance as it proceeds with this assault.
No, Rodi in Amman. No, thank you very much indeed. Fawad Izzadi is a professor in the World Studies Department at the University of Tehran. He's joining us from the Iranian capital. So thank you very much indeed for being with us on Al Jazeera. Tawhid Asadi there just earlier on, our correspondent, outlining the fact that despite Abbas Araghchi's determination that there will be no negotiations, nevertheless, he has gone to Geneva to meet the so-called group of E3. How significant is it that he is prepared to make that journey if, on the face of it, it sounds like Iran is not prepared to change its position?
He is saying to these three countries and others who are paying attention that Iran is willing and able to compromise to reach a conclusion of this attack on Iran. Iran, I'm sure, has a message of its own to the other side. Remember, Iran was negotiating in good faith with the United States until the other side decided to attack. As your reporter in Amman just said, Israelis would not be able to engage in this type of attacks on Iran unless the United States helps. They're helping Israeli jets with refueling. This is a joint American-Israeli project. So he's there for talks, not negotiations, because we had the experience of negotiating with the United States until last week, until the negotiators were killed. This is what Trump said. Trump said Israel killed the people I was negotiating with. So this is the plan for now. We have to wait and see what comes out of the talks today. It is actually illegal under international law, under UN Charter 2.4. To use force or threat to get concessions from a country is illegal under international law. If United States wants concessions from Iran, they can go to UN Security Council, pass a resolution, and then if Iran doesn't comply, they can put Iran under Chapter 7, and then they can attack, not before that. So Iran has no other choice but to do what you're seeing.
You mentioned earlier in your answer that Abbas Araghchi said that Iran was willing to compromise. What format would that compromise take? Because, of course, the sticking point with regard to the nuclear negotiations was that the US was determined that Iran should not be allowed to enrich uranium on its own soil, but it would be allowed to bring in uranium for domestic purposes from another country and have the uranium enriched outside Iran. Is that a compromise that Iran is willing to go to if it means that this conflict will end?
You know, I would say that maybe it was possible to reach a compromise through a consortium or through other mechanisms before Iran was attacked. Now the country is united against United States, against Israel, and even if they were willing to do more on the enrichment issue, I doubt it very much for any Iranian politician, whether it is the foreign minister or anybody else, to actually do more after these attacks. It would be a political suicide for politicians to do that. Dr. Araghchi was very quick today to say there were no talks with the United States during the last week. He basically opposed what the White House spokeswoman said. He denied that statement from the White House spokeswoman. For Iranian politicians, they have to also pay attention to public opinion in Iran, and public opinion in Iran is very proud of the missiles that are landing in Tel Aviv.
At the same time, if I understand it correctly, there is an additional pressure, isn't there? Because Donald Trump has now said that he is going to wait for up to a couple of weeks before deciding whether or not the US is going to get involved in this conflict. What's your assessment of the mood within Iran about whether or not it can actually sustain a retaliation against Israel and attacks against Israel for that period of time? You know,
Iran experienced an imposed war, another imposed one from 1980. until 1988. It was Saddam Hussein, with the help of United States, with the help of all Western countries and some Arab countries. And it was 8 years. It took 8 years, and people in Iran sustained that level of aggression for 8 years. There is this culture of resistance in Iran. So even people who oppose the government for different reasons realized that the reformist government of Dr. Pezeshkian really wanted to have an agreement. They were negotiating in good faith, and this is disrespect of Iran when you treat Iran in this manner in the middle of negotiations. You attack the country. No one really likes that. So the government, if they want to resist these pressures that you mentioned, they have quite good public support if they want to do that.
On that basis, I just want to bring up some pictures we're seeing at the moment coming out of Tehran. There are large crowds which apparently are taking to the streets to demonstrate. Now, I'm not entirely clear what they are demonstrating for, but perhaps you might be able to give us an indication from what you may have seen in Tehran with regard to these crowds gathering and the mood of the crowds. It does seem to be happening in several different locations within the city.
Today is Friday. As you know, in Muslim countries, people hold Friday prayers. Iran has about 1,000 cities, so this is just in Tehran, but in 999 other cities, you're seeing the same demonstrations, and you can see in the pictures that they're holding the country's leader more than before. Why? Because Trump threatened to kill Iran's leader. Israeli defense minister did the same thing. So as I was telling you, there is this sense of unity in the country. There is this rally around the flag effect. You see a lot of Iranian flags. People are rallying around it. And if Netanyahu thought that by attacking Iran, he would have regime change, he needs to fire Iran specialists in Mossad and hire new ones, because this is backfiring on Israel and the United States.